Clerks charged and accused of any matter summoned by the king's justice shall come into his court to answer there to whatever it shall seem to the king's court should be answered there, and in the church court to what it seems should be answered there. And if the clerk be convicted or confess, the church ought not to protect him further. The Constitutions of Clarendon. When King Henry I died in 1135, yet another succession crisis ensued in England. The king's only legitimate son had died in 1119, and a number of candidates emerged who might take the English throne. Among them was young Henry Plantagenet, grandson of the old King Henry through his mother Matilda, and Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, though the boy was a toddler at the time of his grandfather's death. Unfortunately for young Henry Plantagenet, the English people did not love his parents as they had loved his grandfather, Henry I. And while the boy might have made a good king in time, the English nobles could not stomach dealing with a regency led by the Count and Countess of Anjou, and turned instead to Matilda's cousin, Stephen, to rule England. Stephen's reign would be marked by a period of civil strife known as the Anarchy, in which English lords and churchmen alike frequently resisted Stephen's rule, sometimes in support of Matilda's claim, often in support of their own aspirations. To keep his realm together, Stephen, from the outset, began making concessions to nobles and churchmen alike, and the authority of the English crown over the selection of priests and bishops was ceded increasingly to the church. As Stephen's grip on England weakened, Henry Plantagenet matured to adulthood. Politically astute, Henry negotiated court politics in France to solidify his rights to rule Anjou, Normandy, and Brittany, biding his time as the Cold War with Stephen dragged on. Finally, in 1153, Henry invaded England, and after a final campaign against Stephen, the two brokered a peace deal. Stephen would continue to reign, but his son William would not inherit the throne. He instead adopted Henry Plantagenet and made him his heir. The next year, Stephen died unexpectedly after a short illness, and Henry Plantagenet made his way across the Channel to become King of England. When Henry was crowned in Westminster Abbey in 1154, the anarchy was over. The royal succession, so often the cause of political turbulence in England, was secure. Henry and his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, had already welcomed a son, William, and at the coronation, the young queen was visibly pregnant. The two had married in 1152, though under far from normal circumstances. Eleanor had been Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right for years. Aquitaine is a region of France along the western coast, encompassing southwest France near the border with Spain. By marrying Eleanor, Henry's influence extended beyond Normandy and Anjou to include a huge portion of the Kingdom of France, while at the same time he was fighting Stephen for the right to rule England. Even more abnormal about their marriage was that this was Eleanor's second marriage to royalty. Her first husband was Henry's rival, King Louis VII of France, with whom she had two daughters. The two agreed, with papal consent, to have the marriage annulled in 1152, and Eleanor soon married Henry Plantagenet. Their second son, named Henry after his father and great-grandfather, was born within the first year of Henry's ascension. The line of succession was secure, with an heir and with a second son should disaster befall the King of England and his young family. 2 years later, it did. William, eldest son of Henry and Eleanor, died while still a child, and their second son, Henry, assumed the role of heir. With the line secure, Henry set about establishing himself in his new kingdom after decades of unrest during the anarchy. He consolidated secular power through sound administration and justice systems, and set about reclaiming the royal privileges related to the selection of church leaders that Stephen had given up in an attempt to hold on to his own crown. He attempted to do so by installing his chancellor, Thomas Becket, as the Archbishop of Canterbury, though this would eventually backfire. Eventually, however, Henry came to terms with the church by signing the Constitutions of Clarendon in 1164. This agreement established a system by which priests would be subject to English civil law, whereas they had enjoyed a degree of immunity under Stephen. In the wake of the death of their son William, the need for more children was apparent to the king and queen. The couple would go on to have 6 more children, 3 of them sons, over the next decade. By 1166, the line of succession for the House of Plantagenet was more than secure. They now ruled a kingdom which stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. England had reached its zenith. Meanwhile, Henry's children, who should have been a blessing, became a source of regular irritation and anxiety for him. For the rest of his reign, his sons Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and John would intermittently rebel against their father, with Eleanor often taking her children's side in the conflict. Henry eased some of the tension with his eldest surviving son, Henry, by having him coronated as his heir and as the future king of England, in order to train him to the role. However, in 1183, Henry the young king died, and his younger brother Richard became the heir apparent. Henry's conflicts with his surviving sons and with his wife continued through the 1180s, and it was while on campaign against his son Richard in France that Henry suddenly fell ill. In a state of weakness, nearing death, he made peace with Richard and died shortly thereafter. He had affirmed the right for his son to rule England upon his death. That the same crisis that had permeated English royal politics for more than a century was brought once more to the fore. Richard had no children. When Henry II died, England was at a high point. As we'll discuss next week, Henry had successfully restored the balance of power between the crown and the Roman Catholic Church. He had expanded Plantagenet domains to include much of France and had made England a superpower in medieval England. His energetic reign, however, is often overshadowed by the exploits of his 2 sons. The elder, Richard, soon after being crowned King of England, would join the Third Crusade, riding to glory as Richard the Lionheart. The younger, John, is remembered for his ineptitude as a ruler, the man who signed away royal power to his barons with Magna Carta, thereby setting the stage for freedom still enjoyed today in the English-speaking world.